Welcome to Talking Shit, the podcast where we get real about the unfiltered truths women face in the quest for perfection. I'm Jana, your host, a dietitian and fellow woman navigating the pressure to have it all together, the perfect body, career, relationships, and making it all look effortless. Who set that standard anyway? Here, we're calling out the diet fads, hustle culture, beauty standards, and everything else that keeps us feeling stuck. But we're not just venting, we're diving into how to break free and rewrite the rules on your terms. So, grab a coffee or a glass of wine and let's talk some shit. Together, we'll uncover how to live a life that's unapologetically yours. This is Talking Shit. Let's dive in. Betsy, I'm so excited to be able to welcome you onto Talking Shit. We are going to be talking about something that, well, we were talking a little bit before we started recording that both of us have struggled with and maybe still do struggle with at times. And I think a lot of women struggle with. So I am so excited for you to share more about who you are, what you do, who you serve, and really dive into this conversation. So thank you so much for your time today and for being willing to talk some shit with us as well.
Oh, I am so grateful to be here with you and to have this conversation. And, as you know, I'm just a big fan of what you're doing and just fully support your mission and everything that you're doing. So thank you for that. On behalf of us struggling women, we are so grateful. So I am primarily a college professor. I teach public relations at Fresno State, been doing it for 25 years, love my job to the moon. The job sort of evolved over time. Obviously, I still teach PR, but I've really learned that a lot of what my gift, where my gift lies, is helping set people up for success. And so I've integrated that into my teaching, and then I've also started speaking and writing about that. And productivity is something I'm a nerd about. So marrying the idea of setting people up for success in the area of productivity has, again, sort of evolved over time. So I have a podcast that primarily is actually my main audience, are women, although men are welcome, of course. And just the idea that we can accomplish our goals and be productive humans and also be imperfect is something that I would love to talk about all day long.
Yeah. Okay. So the first thing, and it's interesting when you share PR, or like when I hear PR, just in general, like the word that pops into my mind is image. And having this image, whatever that is for an individual or an organization, how did that, I mean, is that accurate? Or like what comes to mind when you are teaching the PR aspect that really someone is diving into?
Yeah, so obviously image and reputation are a big part of public relations for sure. I like to think about it as the art and science, because it's definitely, and there's a huge aesthetic component. There's also, formulas, there's ways to do it correctly, there's ways to not. So the art and science of communicating with an organization's audiences, whatever that is, and however many there are, in order to meet organization goals. So it's a very, very specific and it's objective, right? You shouldn't do PR unless it's helping you get to where you want to go. And it also really relies on that communication with the audiences, which to your point does, have a lot to do with reputation and brand. And that's something that I, talk about a lot when I'm speaking and also with my students that, your brand is really, really important to your ability to accomplish your goals. However, one of the things that I always talk about is, yes, you should try to be your brand, as much as possible every day, but perfection is not required. And the example I love to give is punctuality, right? We all know that if you are on time, that's a good brand builder, right? It just is. People don't like to wait for you. If you're late all the time, it's like you're saying that your time is more valuable than ours. Anyway, there's just a host of things that are bad if you're late all the time. So I, give this whole spiel about why it's so important to be punctual, all that. And then I say, well, but you don't have to nail it every single time, because if you are someone who is known as being on time, that's your brand. And every once in a while you're late, it's fine. You have, acquired forgiveness insurance. And, people will forgive you for the occasional, tardiness, because primarily you have established yourself as a punctual person. So um, even in brand building, perfection is not required.
Mhm. Well, something that's like super interesting because I think you do this in a really unique fashion. Because when you think PR, like, I mean, like I said, my brand instantly went to image and we go to brand, but there's a lot that we do for ourselves, right? Like that is PR driven or that productivity aspect that's driven. And I know, again, with both of the audiences that we really serve and that tune into us, this idea that you have to be really a machine in order to get everything done is really, it's burning out a lot of women. So can we dive into that? Because there's productivity, there's perfection, and I think we're getting it really wrong. So can share with me like your perspective on this. And you have the handled ish, which I love, and we're certainly going to dive into that because I like this needs to be trending like handled ish. Like I got a handled ish is like the goal. So tell us more about where that came from for you and how that applies and what you want to share with more women.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as you mentioned, my name of my podcast is Handled Ish, ISH, Productivity for the Imperfect. And I really have become more and more in love with the concept of being handled-ish as this adventure, moves on because it really is resonating with people. And it sort of evolved when it occurred to me that even though, I talk about things being handled, I encourage my students to handle things. I'm always like writing in emails, hashtag handled. That's like a big, word that I've used forever. In fact, my students even bought me a brick at the university that says, Betsy Hayes handled. So it became such a big part of my brand. But reflecting on it, no, that is not who I am like as a total human. I really am a handled-ish person. There are things that I do really well. There are things that I do kind of okay. And there are things that I do really, really poorly. And I can still be a productive, successful human and be handled-ish, which is why I thought, you know what, we need to talk about this idea more. And so, anyway, so that's where it all started. And my two favorite things about this idea are that productivity is subjective. And to your point about a lot of women are burning out because they're trying to be these machines. I think a lot of times we try to be a machine because we're trying to accomplish someone else's version of productivity, someone else's version of what a successful life looks like. And I think it's so important that we take a step back and go, okay, well, do I agree? Right? Do I agree that this is the definition of success for me? Do I agree that this is the definition of productivity for me? Or is, my version different? Personally, I feel it's very important to me to be like a plus educator as often as I can. That's where I put so much of my energy and my talent. And, I still fall short, but that's, something I try to accomplish. And as a result, I can't do everything else A plus, right? So I quit ironing like 25 years ago.
Yes.
It's like, you know what? If my clothes can't come out of the dryer and go on a hanger, then I probably don't wear them.
Yes.
And I also, my house is very tidy, but you can't eat off the floor all the time. Well, please don't eat off the floor ever, but you know what I mean? Like it's not, like spotless. And I've decided that that's okay because there are other things that are more important to me, and perfection in some of these areas that I can let go. Even though other people might, again, that might be, values associated with other folks, and that's great. But it's okay. It's okay to let some of other people's definition stay with them.
Yes. Well, and what I hear in that, so two things come to mind is this idea of like trade-offs, right? Like
Yeah.
based on your values, what do you want to trade off? Because the reality is that we can't do it all.
Mhm.
And the other thing is that comparison aspect of comparing your life to someone else's life and then trying to replicate their life that really isn't your life. And that I think leads to a lot of exhaustion because it's not really matching your true lifestyle. It's trying to be someone else. And more than half the time, we don't even know all the things that go into their own life.
Yeah, absolutely. So to your point about not having it all, I really love to think about life in seasons. With any luck, we'll be around for a while, right?
Yeah.
And there are different things that you really need to and want to focus on in different seasons of your life. And that means that the other parts, don't get your full attention and your best productive self. If you have children and they're little, clearly there's a lot of time and energy that needs to go into that. And maybe, your career, you still keep it going, but it's not, fully on the front burner. There might be times when, your career is, on the front burner and you're just, going on all cylinders and you're, doing the things and your home responsibilities aren't as big as they were before. And, if you're an empty nester like me, it's just a whole different world, right? And, trying to figure out what are the places I want to, use my energy. So when we think of life in seasons, I think we can relax a little bit and go, okay, well, right now, what I really want to be good at are these things. The other stuff, we'll revisit that in the next season. And when you revisit it, maybe you'll decide to keep it on the back burner, right? Totally okay. But to think about, there will be time when the kids aren't little, right? There will be time when you're not running around, to soccer practices and this and that. There'll be, a time when you're retired, right? And you won't have to, work, all the gazillion hours that you're working. So I think that's very helpful. And just one quick thing on the comparison. I saw the best meme the other day, and it was this beautiful apple with like this crown, and I don't know, it was this beautiful shiny red apple and looking in the mirror. And the backside of the apple was like a big bite had been taken out of it. And it was like kind of, how apples get kind of brown and yucky. And so the whole idea, right, is social media is what we see on the front side of the apple. And there might be all kinds of stuff going on behind that we never see. And I love visuals. And so it really was, hit home for me that we need to remember that, right? Social media is a highlight reel. Sometimes our conversations with people are highlight reels that, we don't hear about the other stuff unless we're very, very close and vulnerable with people.
Very true. So, when we were kind of prepping for this podcast, you shared that idea of perfectionism can actually prevent us from taking action. But there's also this part of if we're not, or at least a lot of the women that I work with, they'll say, like, if I'm not perfect, then I'm failing. Where does that, I mean, I know those are two different things, but how do we as women get that messaging that if we're not perfect, then we're failing, or if we're not perfect, then it must mean there's something wrong with us, right? Like there seems to be this connection to perfection and a lot of internal dialogue that's not really supportive of, well, a lot of things, right? Confidence, self-esteem, self-compassion, right? Like all those things. So how do we get this messaging and how can we really start to disconnect from, okay, I know my goal isn't to be perfect. My goal is to be human. And if I'm a human, then this is how I can act and this is what's acceptable, right? How do we start detangling all that?
No, it's so critical. And to the first point about how, perfection can lead to inaction, I think that's one reason to just throw it out the window because sometimes in fact, I, went through that with the launching of my podcast. I was like, I have to have 6 months, recorded and I need to have 400 ideas and I need to have a spreadsheet and so like it literally sat on the shelf for like 2.5 years. And then finally I was like, you know what? 6 weeks in the can is what I can do. And we're just going to go with it. And we can't let ourselves not act because we're so worried about, doing something perfectly. In entrepreneurship, there's this idea of a minimally viable product, an MIP. And I think we need to use that more in our lives, especially if you want to start something new. doesn't have to be perfect. Let's just get a minimally viable product and then adjust along the way. It's got to be to the standard that you're not going to be embarrassed by it, right? But it doesn't have to be perfect, because that's literally not the goal, especially when you're starting something new, because you don't know what you don't know. And if we go into that experimental mindset, then we can add a little playfulness to it, right? It's like, ooh, I'm going to try this experiment. I have this minimally viable product. I'm just going to start it, knowing that the goal is actually to get better as we go, because we're going to continue to experiment and adjust, which is a completely different mindset, right? Than figuring everything out before we launch, because that's what we do, right? Because we're scared. We are, don't want to be judged, all that. If we're just like, you know what? That's not even what we're thinking about. We want to have fun and experiment and learn. Then it just becomes a way different exercise, which I think is really helpful.
Yeah.
To your point about the conditioning, right? I wish I had a magic wand, right? I have two daughters, and I would love to magic wand them and all of us, right? And be like, you know what? The messages that we are continually fed about how, women so need to be perfect. The, soliloquy in the Barbie movie resonated. That's why it resonated so much with people, because we are given these conflicting messages. It's not only that we need to be perfect, that we need to be perfect in this way and this way, even though those are diametrically opposed. Yeah. So, girls, just figure it out, figure out how to do that. So the messages that we're getting, we can't even possibly, live up to, because a lot of those things are in conflict. So the sooner we can be like, you know what? I want to be a role model for the people in my life, right? And I want to live up to the standard that I want. And if that resonates with people, great. If not, let's just focus on the people that are truly important to us, and not, the rest of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. As you share that, I hear like this is really where we can allow like peace and ease and flow to come back into our daily routines, because you really have created it based on what you have the capacity for, not some other external variable.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that. Just the words ease and flow, doesn't it just make your body just sort of relax? It's like, oh yeah, my favorite part of I meditate, and my favorite part is when my meditation instructor talks about living with ease. I'm like, oh, just sounds amazing, right? But how many of us don't even use that as a goal?
Oh, yeah. That's never, oh man. Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
So, okay, I will say, Betsy, well, I'll just speak for myself, and I think this might really resonate with a lot of women. So, at least initially, when I was really starting to put down, I had two big players. I had the perfectionist and I had the people pleaser. And they like to run the show big time for a very long time. And it's only been probably the last like 2 to 3 years where they've been kind of like, we're putting them aside and we're seeing what else comes about to see, like, does that feel better for my system? Right. And it's interesting because even though I knew that I wasn't a machine, that I was human and I didn't want to experience anxiety, I did want peace and ease, it was still so difficult to step away from the idea that I'm not perfect. It was so hard. What do you know, like, why do we have that resistance? Like, even though we can see it, and even though, like, we know that we're not perfect, right? Why is it so difficult to say that we can't do it all?
Oh, it's such a good question. And those are evil twins, right? The
Yeah.
perfectionism and the people pleaser. And, there's a reason that there's alliteration there, right? Because they are often, sisters in crime and or partners in crime. And it's awful. And, again, suffer from both of those elements for sure myself. And I think one of the reasons that I think that's so ingrained in us is because we don't talk enough about what it means to be human, and how so tied together are the fact that humans are imperfect, right? We don't talk about the fact that humans are imperfect. We talk about, humans can be this, and goal setting is important, and love all of that, of course, and love being successful, but I think that needs to not be the entire conversation. We need to talk more about how we're just by design imperfect, and that's actually part of the fun. If you think about all of the really great stories in most of our lives, it's when things did not go perfect. The stories that you keep telling, we just had, Thanksgiving recently. A lot of folks were sitting around the table telling stories about when they were little, when their kids were little. They were not about the perfect days, I promise you. They were about, the crazy, things that happened. And, when, so and so tripped and, broke their arm and, then, was, took too much pain medicine and, tried to kiss the doctor or whatever, and, those are the things that really give our lives that richness. And by trying to be perfect, we are eliminating that opportunity for ourselves, which is so wild, right? But it's true. So I think we need to talk more about how the imperfection piece is actually where a lot of the joy comes from.
And like reality of life.
Right.
It's always super interesting. Like we build, and I mean, I'm a dietitian, right? Like I help individuals with their creating a healthy lifestyle. And it's always very interesting how perfectionism or the all or nothing, black or white mentality really prevents individuals from experiencing health, because it is, well, I have everything has to be perfect or else I'm just off the wagon, right? But it also, like, the idea that you have to be perfect in order for it to work is not dealing with real life, because there's no one day that went perfectly. So actually stepping into this handle-ish, right? Like aspect allows for the reality of life to be considered and
Mm-hmm.
keeps us moving. Like we know that everything's not going to work out as planned. We know that we're going to run late. We know that we're going to hit traffic. We know that it's going to rain or whatever the thing is. Like we know that these are variables that can happen in real life. Now, how do we navigate those when they do happen versus the other way, we're assuming like, oh, nope, like everything's gonna be perfect, right? And then when it doesn't, we're like, oh, I have no game plan. I have no tools. Like I'm just out. So it's very interesting, like how our brain really tricks us into thinking like that's real life when it's really not.
Mm-hmm. Which is so weird. No, you're absolutely right. And the all or nothing thinking is something that so many of us suffer from, especially in the area of health and nutrition. It's like you're either on or you're off. Well, no, no, you can be like mostly on and a tiny bit off. And again, we want to reflect on our actual life. And I think that's part of the therapy used in a very loose way. But, to reflect on, okay, I'm a person of whatever age you are, and I have accomplished things. Okay, so let's look at two of those things that I have accomplished. And we need to ask ourselves, was that a perfect path to the goal?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is no. No matter, I mean, maybe 1 in 4 million of these conversations might have been a perfect path, but most of us accomplish things imperfectly, but we still do it. And so remembering that we still can accomplish our goals, even if the road is a little windy, even if the path is a little bit longer. So because we've done it before, that's where, perhaps a little bit more of the confidence can come in. It's like, oh, okay, well, I did do that. It was a little crooked, but I did it, right? So I can do this even if it's not, so windy, or excuse me, so straight. And then we need to really think about how it feels when we practice it. So I'll go back to my podcast. So when I first started, I was, scripting a lot and having like a lot of thoughts ahead of time. And that was what my comfort level was. And then I had a week where I didn't have an opportunity to do that, or I chose, time is always a choice. I chose to not, prep as much as I normally do. And my first thought was, okay, well, it's just not going to happen this week, because it's not going to be, the way I wanted it to be. And then I thought, you know what? No, this is literally the brand, right? And so I'm just going to do it. And it was really difficult for my stomach. I was like really nervous. And it was really interesting. The feedback was actually better for that particular episode than the ones where I'm a little more scripted because people felt I was a lot more conversational. And I thought, okay, well, I did it. No one died.
No
It
one's up.
actually ended up being a little bit of a positive thing. So reflecting on when we, bite the bullet and, let's just go back to your nutrition thing, right? And we're off plan, for lack of a better term, and again, in quotes, at lunch. And then we don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater and we go back to the way that we say we intend to eat at dinner time. Let's look at that at the end of the day and go, wow, you know what? I was able to course correct. I did it. And now I'm good. So some of that reflection needs to be built in, I think.
Yeah. And that's where I hear like the productivity really coming out. It sounds like with just knowing that it's not going to be perfect, it actually enhances productivity and keeps you in the game longer.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Hmm. What other like tenets really help with that increased productivity? Because I know, I mean, a lot of women that are perfectionists, a lot of them are type A's. They're super, involved, right? Like they work full-time jobs, they have kids, they serve on boards, they're in their community, right? Like they're really highly productive.
Mhm.
So what other things should they be keeping in mind as they're stepping away from needing to be perfect, but still really wanting to be very productive?
Mhm. I think some reality checks are really helpful. And so one thing that I do personally, and this is not my original idea. Laura Vanderkam, who's a productivity, she writes wonderful books. I'm obsessed with her work. One of her tenets is to plan your weeks on Fridays. And I actually started doing that. And then I sort of realized why I loved it so much when I started reading her work. And the reason that this is important is for two reasons. The first one is most of the time, especially Friday afternoons, are not our most productive time. We're tired. People may have, left early. No one's responding to our calls or emails. And it's usually not our maximum productivity, window. The other thing that's good. So, okay. So number one, it's not our maximum productivity window. So we can actually accomplish something really valuable. So that's awesome, right? And that fits with all of our, boxes. The other thing is most of us are a little bit tired on Friday afternoon. And I find that if I plan my week when I'm a little bit tired, I'm much more realistic about what I can actually accomplish. Because if you plan your week on Monday morning when you're like fueled up with coffee and you're pumped for the week, and like you will probably overbook yourself because you have all this adrenaline. But if you're a little bit, having the Friday afternoon slump, you probably are going to treat your schedule with a little bit more realism. And so that is just one tip that I have found works incredibly well for me. And I, especially if you are an overscheduler for yourself, then, it might be worth a try.
I am so going to use that one. Now, I will say I usually plan my week on Sundays, so Sunday evening, but that typically could lend to like, what is it, the Monday scaries or whatever they call it, where I'm like, oh man, I really did fill my schedule and I'm like kind of bracing myself for the week ahead. So I love this idea of doing it Friday afternoons when there's kind of a lull, but you can still be productive in a different way, but it also is a more realistic way. I love that.
And the other reason why I don't love Sundays is because you need to have your whole weekend. You
Mm.
really do. And, give yourself that gift, right? Of, and if you have to plan an actual, because a lot of people do the Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening thing. And if that's hard to let go, maybe give yourself a regular Sunday activity for a while until you're like, oh yeah, I really much prefer, rotating, this Sunday night dinner with this group of friends, right? Where maybe we go to each other's houses, every Sunday. And so we only have to cook once a month on a Sunday or something like that. Train ourselves that, wow, Sunday evening could be way better spent for me. And then you also have that confidence of all that your week is handled because you did it on Friday.
Mhm.
So give yourself Sunday night, my friend.
Yeah. Oh, I will check in with you on that. I'm doing that on Fridays, and I'd love to hear anyone else that starts shifting it that way too, and just the difference that they experience. I think that's a great tip that you shared. And a great tool, right? Like a tangible tool that we can take away to still be productive, but also not to have that like really that stress or that anxiety that is connected to having to perform. So I love that. You also mentioned a couple different things just as it relates to like authenticity, connection. How do those play into this handle-ish aspect? Because like you shared a story related to like Thanksgiving that I thought was so funny. But it really shared for me, right? Like I shared, I just instantly think of connection. Like I want to like it's easier to connect with that person, but also it's that authentic aspect, like that real aspect of life of like, oh yeah, or like that could be a great opportunity of like, oh, that's happened to me too. Oh my gosh, I'm not alone. Or like, oh my gosh, this is hilarious and you're really gonna remember it. So how are those like being authentic, forming those connections, how does that connect to being productive but not perfect?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you that when we share, that those imperfect stories, that we do often foster a sense of connection and also, prove that we are human, right, to the people in our lives. And again, that's why that whole handled ish is really important. If we want to be perceived as productive, successful people, yes, we need to do productive, successful things. However, in order to have really strong relationships, that can't be like it, because if you are always talking to someone who's always successful and always productive, that probably isn't going to be as connected of a relationship, because there might be a little bit of jealousy or envy or pressure, those sorts of things. And so it's really important to share the times and things don't go right. And to your point about my friend in Thanksgiving, it was so cute. We were, like, how'd it go? How was your Thanksgiving? And she's like, oh my gosh, well, I was going to cook my turkey in a bag and I had it all set. And then my niece came over, and for whatever reason, she wanted to see the bag, which was kind of weird. And so I showed her the bag, and it turned out that I had the wrong bag and it was going to melt on the turkey. And so she saved the day. And then so I'm laughing so hard at her telling this story. And then she's like, oh yeah, so then we put in the right bag, and then I forgot to turn on the oven. And I'm like, oh my. And so the end of the story was the turkey got cooked, the plastic, with the bag, the correct bag was used. They had a beautiful day. And, even though, her mashed potatoes and all those other dishes, turned out exactly the way she wanted, the fact that there was this little piece that was almost a complete train wreck really did make me just relate so much more to her, and just made it be like, oh yeah, well, she's human, just like the rest of us, right? Who, forget to buy an ingredient, for example.
Put the wrong ingredient in, yes.
Yes, right. Or too much salt when it should be sugar, or, yeah, all of that is important.
Mhm. So, for someone that is really resonating with this message and really does want to maybe step away from feeling like they always have to be perfect or on or have that image, all the things that may come up within this conversation, what are like your top two tips or tools that you would say like where they could start if they're just beginning this journey? They're like, yep, I know I'm a perfectionist. Yeah, I don't want to keep doing this because it's really not working for me. Like I'm burnt out, I'm anxious, I'm depressed, I'm whatever else the thing is that they are personally feeling. How do they begin? How do they start? How do they fix it?
Okay. Well, it's a lifelong process, which I know nobody wants to hear, but it is. It's just, we just have to keep, because, the messaging in society is so prevalent, right? We have to keep, I don't know if we're ever like fixed, but we can make massive improvements.
Yep.
And a lot of it has to do, well, two things. I mean, the first one is really figuring out what your definition of productivity is, you as a human, not what your mom thinks you should do, or your grandma, or your aunt, or even your boss to some degree, right? I mean, I'm not saying to not do what your boss tells you to do, but there needs to be dialogue sometimes about, how, what sort of effort is needed in this particular thing, or is this particular task even necessary? Like, those conversations need to be had. So think about what is your definition of productivity in the different roles that you have, and work more on that, because that's going to give you satisfaction and happiness. And then the other thing that people can do is this idea of reducing decision fatigue. Because I think, especially as women, because that whole mental load or emotional load that we read so much about, there's so much brain space being utilized on a myriad of decisions that have to, be made every day. And so if we can reduce our decision fatigue, meaning our exhaustion based on all of those decisions we have to make on a regular basis, that frees up brain space for other things. So what I mean by that are, if we think about the things that deciding on causes stress, then we can fix that. So if you are someone, when you go out to a restaurant, you have a really hard time figuring out what to order because you want to order the right thing, whatever that is, right? According to you. And so you spend a lot of time, oh, should I get this? What are you getting? Oh gosh, I should get all this, right? We've been those people, and we've been out with those people, right? So reducing decision fatigue would look like, hey, I'm going to this restaurant. All menus are online now, right? I'm going to look at this and I'm going to decide what to have before I even get there, so I can just order and then focus on the company and have a much better time. Mm. Or if you can't commit, pick two and be like, okay, I'm going to be, spur of the moment girl. And, when I get there, I'm going to choose between X and Y, depending on what I'm feeling. Right. But you just reduce the amount of decision fatigue so much for yourself that you have freed up brain space for other stuff, and you're going to have more fun. So there's lots of things that we can do with that. There's, wardrobe is something that we can reduce decision fatigue in. Meal planning, is something that we can reduce decision fatigue tremendously. Gift giving, holidays, there's just a lot that we can do if we really think about narrowing our choices. So, what are we going to do? Or excuse me, how can we narrow our choices in a category to make less decisions? Life right now is so fabulous because we have access to everything. However, we can be paralyzed because there's so much choice. Oh, that's why, frankly, we love to go to restaurants that have like 3 things, to choose from, or a coffee shop that maybe has 2 choices versus a million. Because it's like, okay, X or Y, cool, I'm out. Versus, oh my God, should I get this syrup? Or,
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So that first part where you said define what is productive for you, that reminds me of capacity, right? Like knowing your own capacity and saying, okay, this is what I can do, right? And like you get to establish that for you. The second one reminds me of, I call it the cereal aisle example, right? Like where we go down the cereal aisle and there used to be like a handful of cereal options and now there's like 20 million. But ultimately, we go back to the one that we know, right? Like there's usually not that we spend a lot of time deciding like, oh, I should really try a different one, or, oh, this one looks good, or I'm not really sure. Is that healthy? Is that, unhealthy? All these questions that we ask ourselves. And then we ultimately still pick the same cereal that we we're going to choose from the beginning. So I'm a huge person, like a fan of choice and options, but to what extent, right? Like if it's putting us in that paralysis, then that's really not allowing us to move forward. So interesting. Okay. So number one is define what is productive for them. And number two is that decision fatigue, finding those things where you can really decrease your brain's activity in making those decisions.
And I love your point about the cereal aisle and also how we do want to recognize that choice and options are also valuable, which is why we need to know ourselves. So the wardrobe example, right? There are people who love to figure out what to wear and accessorize, and it is fun for them. It is a, hobby even, right? And that is awesome. And under no circumstances should those folks reduce the amount of choices on their wardrobe, because that would be awful for them, right? However, if you are not that person, again, knowing ourselves and going, you know what, I would really benefit from reducing my amount of choices in what I'm going to wear, then, maybe you can implement some of those strategies. I'm one of those people. I started wearing dresses like 8 years ago to simplify my life. Not even kidding. That's usually what I wear. And so at the beginning on Sundays, or whenever, I will put 5 dresses at the beginning or at the front of my closet. And then, I don't go, this is Monday, this is Tuesday, right? I'm like, these are the 5 that I'm going to wear this week. And then whatever I'm feeling, when I wake up, I will choose one of the 5. And obviously on Friday, there's only one left, so I have no choice. But it sort of is that nice little hybrid where it's like, okay, well, I'm not being super, rigid, but I don't have to look at the rest of the closet because I've already decided on this particular span of choices.
Yeah. What another great productivity hack, right? Like of being able to just know, okay, this is what I'm working with this week and be able to move forward from there.
Mm-hmm.
So this is how I'm going to end because it's interesting. Like I did not know we were going to land in this spot, but after our conversation and after what you've shared of just like the steps that individuals can take to create that handled-ish life, right? It's really honoring your uniqueness. Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your uniqueness, your values, maximizing your personal strengths, not worrying about, like again, ironing, right? It's not my strength. So I'm like, you know what? No. And we can, let things go. And, does my mom tease me every once in a while about never ironing? Absolutely. But you know what? I have to let that not bother me. She, I love my mom and we're very close, and she doesn't tease me all the time, but sometimes she gives me a bad time about it. And I have to learn that that was a decision that I made, right? Based on what is important to me. So yes, your authentic self, what you're good at, your superpowers, I like to call it, and then what your values are at this season. Remember, because in your next season, you could, bring something from the front burner or from the back burner to the front burner.
Yeah, that shift and that um flow, right?
Mm-hmm.
Flow of life. Yeah.
Yeah. Living with ease, right? That's what we want.
Yeah, that is the ultimate goal. That is the ultimate goal. Awesome. Betsy, this has been so wonderful. And I'm sure we could talk about a lot of different things and dive into them as they relate to so many other things. But I think that this really helped open up that space to have a conversation and give women permission to not have to be perfect, but to really honor their uniqueness and set forth like who are you, right? Like, and what do you bring to the table and honor that in a way that feels really good for them and also probably those around them as well. So thank you for allowing that to happen today.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And I love that because that's what we want, right? We want to, that whole like be you because everyone else is taken, right? That's what we want. We want people to be their authentic selves because that's when they shine. And then it's more fun for us too.
Yes, it is. Yes, it certainly is because then it's so much, it makes life so much more rich. So it's wonderful. Well, thank you again. I'm so excited to hear, from other people if they start doing the Friday. planning of the week and the other ways that they really are stepping away from perfectionism and really moving into their authentic self. So thank you. This has been Talkin' Shit. If you like this episode, please give it a thumbs up or leave a review on the Apple Podcast app. If you want more episodes, click that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more, visit healthwins.org. Talkin' Shit is produced and hosted by me, Jana. This production is also made possible by the Community Media Access Collaborative. Learn more at cmac.tv. See you next time.